Hey everyone, this is Virginia Foley and Jason Kober from Compliance Forward. We're here today with a late breaking special edition of the Promotional Intelligence Podcast because, drumroll, OPDP issued another letter yesterday, June 25th. This is an interesting one. It's kind of juicy. It took us a while to kind of get through it. We're going to walk through it step by step. And Jason did some super sleuthing on the internet and found a semi replica of the video. So we have some visuals to show you too. So let's get into it. Jason's going to walk us through the PI and the letter. And per usual, I'll be chiming in. Let's get started.
Thanks, Virginia. So the first thing I want to point out, the video appears to be presented on, or at least it was previously presented on Photofrin's Mechanism Action webpage. It appears that there were two video postings, one for esophageal cancer and one for non-small cell lung cancer. It's important to note that on the webpage, they did present the ISI in conjunction with the videos, but the website has been updated and the videos have been removed from the Photofrin website at the time of this recording. Before we get into the letter, let's talk a little bit about what this product is, what it does, how it works, because I think it's really important. This is a really interesting product. So for starting, we'll talk about the indications. So the product is approved for 3 indications: esophageal cancer, endobronchial cancer, and high-grade dysplasia of Barrett's esophagus. We're going to talk a little bit more about the indications later on as we break down the letter. But what's really interesting with this product is how it works. So Photofrin is a 2-stage delivery process. So I've jumped down to the mechanism action and the label here. And what we can see is that Photofrin is what they call a photodynamic therapy, or a PDT, and this is a 2-stage process. So the process starts with intravenous administration of Photofrin, and then over the course of about 40 to 72 hours, the tissues in the body absorb the intravenous medicine, which is Photofrin. After about 40 to 72 hours, the second stage of this process begins, which is when a illumination device, their laser light, is delivered directly to the tumors, which are inside the.
Like the esophagus. Yep.
Thank you, Virginia. What I want to point out, though, in the MOA, there's a couple things here that are important to highlight, and we have highlighted them. So first, we see that tumor death is going to occur through ischemic necrosis secondary to vascular occlusion. That's really important to understand how this is working. So this is how it's going to lead to necrosis of the tumor. But it's important to understand here that the necrotic reaction and associated inflammatory responses may evolve over several days. And this directly ties to the warning precautions that we see in this product, because these reactions are not going to be instantaneous. There's any number of things that will occur or can occur over several days following this initial treatment. So that's really important to be mindful of. Now let's jump back to the dosing section, because again, this is really important. As we said, the illumination with laser light is going to occur about 40 to 50 hours after that initial injection. There is an option for another round of treatment, 96 to 120 hours after injection. But what we see here in the dosage section too is that they recommend debridement via endoscopy is required about 2 to 3 days after the initial light application. And as we saw in the MOA, because there is a delay in that necrosis and inflammation over time, there's going to be a risk for airway obstruction. So that's why the dosage section talks about this debridement step 2 to 3 days after initial light application, and they say it's required. So that's another important consideration when we talk about the dose in this product. And the last thing I want to talk about is the safety profile, because that isn't discussed in the letter. It's really important to see here that the safety profile on this product is fairly lengthy. So we have several contraindications. It's contraindicated in patients with porphyria. It's contraindicated in patients with an existing tracheoesophageal or bronchoesophageal fistula. Contraindicated patients with tumors eroding into a major blood vessel. That's a big one. It's not suitable for emergency patients. And really importantly here, PDT is not suitable for patients with esophageal or gastric varices, or patients with esophageal ulcers greater than 1 centimeter in diameter.
Yep.
All really important contraindications here. We're going to talk about that in the letter. For warnings and precautions, there's 12 warnings and precautions in this label. And again, we're going to talk about that in conjunction with the letter. So let's flip over to the letter. So that's a quick overview of what Photofrin is, how it works, what it does, and what the safety profile looks like. Getting into the letter, what we can see here is that they've been cited for 2 videos, one for an esophageal cancer MOA video and one for a non-small cell lung cancer MOA video. This is really interesting. This stood out to me because Photofrin did receive 2 letters on September 9th, 2025. Both of those letters were actually targeted at conference presentations, and in those 2 September letters, we saw OPDP separated the letters out by indication. So they issued Photofrin 2 letters for the same product, but for separate indications. And what we see happening here is they've issued 1 letter for those separate indications. So this is kind of separate from what's going on with Photofrin. I think, seeing OPDP issuing letters again for same or similar claims within the same product and not separating out by indication, I think is a good sign. This is the way OPDP traditionally has operated. So to see them combine these into a single letter, I think is a positive development. Not so much for Photofrin, but I think for the larger regulatory space, I think we're starting to see signs that OPDP is returning to some of their historical practices. But the first thing we see here in the letter, in the first block, in the first paragraph, is they're addressing the presentation of the indication. And what we see is that in the beginning of the videos, they introduce Photofrin, but they only reveal a partial indication. And specifically, the letter says that they omit specific patient populations and limitations. They say that by failing to adequately disclose the full indication of Photofrin, the video creates a misleading impression. Now, what's interesting here is towards the end of this paragraph, they say that they acknowledge that the indications are presented in the indications for use section at the end of the video, but they say that those indications are presented in small plain font and for only about 5 seconds. So this sounds to me like they showed the ISI at the end of the video for only about 5 seconds, but we don't know because we don't see a copy of the video that OPDP reviewed. Virginia, what are your thoughts on this first block where we talk about the indication?
Absolutely. There's a lot to unpack here. I think one, you're right on to spotlight that this was 2 videos, 1 letter, with multiple indications. So I think I concur. That's a positive sign from the regulatory perspective. But I think that a couple things here. The first thing that stood out to me, honestly, was the use of the word limitations, albeit these are very complicated patient populations and the limitations come with or the indications come with a lot of specificity, but there isn't a limitation of use. So I'm used to seeing the word limitations tied to an LOU. So I thought that's just something to notice. It doesn't change anything because they didn't fully disclose the indications until the end. But, honestly, I have to say this is a struggle. This is really hard to it's a common thing to think about is when you're doing a video, how do you present the full indication up front, especially when it's super complicated? Can you do kind of a see and say thing where you could have some supers and some voiceover trying to figure out how to communicate the salient points of the indication? Obviously putting it at the back in the, as it was described in the small plain font and 5 seconds was not optimal, but I don't think it's that simple. I think it's really challenging to present an indication, especially indications like this with these types of patients that are very sick. So that's kind of what stood out to me so far on the letter, but let's keep going. It's a lot to unpack.
Yep. Okay, so the letter then moves on to the next section, and again, this would be where having those section headings would be really, really helpful. It appears that this letter is structured with indication violations first, followed by safety violations, and then we get into the MOA. So the next section we're going to talk about is the presentation of risk information. So the first thing that the letter is talking about in the next section here is the presentation of the contraindications. It says that the videos don't communicate the contraindications, which as we saw in the label, the first contraindication is that Photofrin is contraindicated in patients with porphyria. That's not mentioned in the video. And then we get into the next contra that was omitted, which is that it's contraindicated in patients with tumors eroding into a major blood vessel. Again, really important for HCPs to know that. I want to acknowledge that they do present their full ISI on the webpage where this video was presented, but I don't believe that they present that in their ISI. Yeah, they just go right into the warnings and precautions. So again, that's something that's going to be really important that the agency is going to call out. In the esophageal cancer video, we see that there's this claim about being able to treat esophageal ulcers that are greater than 1 centimeter in diameter. And again, as we saw in the label specifically says it can't treat esophageal ulcers greater than 1 centimeter in diameter. So let's take a look at the video and we'll see what that looks like.
Let's do it. And good
So
job finding partial video. So the video that Jason found matches the transcript, but it doesn't show the safety at the end as described in the letter. So we're pretty confident that we can talk to pieces of it and give you guys a visual.
And a non-thermal red light is delivered. The selectivity of Photofrin allows it to self-target tumors that are partially or completely obstructing the airway, as well as non-visible tumors that are buried deeper into the tissue. The energy transfer generates reactive singlet oxygen, which selectively destroys the cancer cells with up to a 6 millimeter depth of ablation in a single direction or a diameter of up to 1.2 centimeters.
There it is.
Yep. So there you heard it. So again, that's what they're calling out. They say a diameter of up to 1.2 centimeters. But as we saw that in the label, it's limited to esophageal ulcers less than 1 centimeter. I'm sorry, it's not suitable for patients with esophageal or gastric varices or ulcers greater than 1 centimeter. Okay, so moving on into the next section. Again, we're still talking about risk presentation here, and we get into the warnings and precautions. And just a reminder, whenever OPDP underlines things, they're highlighting the fact that this is what has been omitted from the presentation. In this case, they're underlining items that are important that should have been included in the ISI but were omitted. And the recurring theme that came to mind when I was reading this, what we're talking about here, if you want to characterize the text that was omitted, the concept is serious and actionable. These are serious and actionable warnings and precautions. And when you see what the agency is highlighting, you see that these are really important items that should have been communicated to HCPs. So the first thing is 5.1, the gastroesophageal fistula and perforation. Again, serious and sometimes fatal gastrointestinal and esophageal necrosis and perforation can occur following treatment. That's really important for the HCPs to know, and that was not included in the ISI. Again, moving into pulmonary and gastroesophageal hemorrhage, so patients with large centrally located tumors, cavitating tumors, or extensive tumors extrinsic to the bronchus are at high risk for fatal massive hematitis. Sorry, I'm kind of butchering these words. It's a Friday afternoon. Photosensitivity. This is a big one. So in photosensitivity in the ISI, they combine two warnings and precautions, one for general photosensitivity and the other for ocular photosensitivity. And this is really important because when patients take this product, they're going to be they're going to be photosensitive for up to 90 days. And it's really important when we look at the warnings and precautions here and see all of the side effects that go with the photosensitivity. Patients are encouraged to not go outside. They're encouraged to stay inside under ambient light and to test their skin sensitivity before exposing themselves to sunlight. Sunscreen isn't going to work. It's not just UV light. It's any kind of daylight is going to potentially lead to skin redness or blistering. So this is really important. And unfortunately, the ISI doesn't mention that patients could experience this photosensitivity for up to 90 days. And then finally, we have 5.8 airway obstruction. And as we see here, that we have treatment-induced inflammation can obstruct the main airway. Remember, when we talked about the MOA, it takes a little bit of time. It could take days before this inflammation shows up. So it's really important for this to, one, be monitored, but there's a directive to physicians that they should be prepared to carry out an immediate bronchoscopy to remove secretions and debris should this happen. And then finally, in the embryo fetal toxicity warning and precaution, they failed to mention that not just females of reproductive potential, but males with female partners need to use effective contraceptive, and they need to do so for up to 5 months after that final dose. So they do acknowledge here in the letter that some of the risk information is presented. I'm going to switch over to the video and we can show how that risk information was presented. So they present it here in the video. but it's minimal risk. We see that they say may cause inflammation at the site of treatment, photosensitivity for eyes and skin, not for emergent patients. So that's the contra. So very limited risk presentation, and the agency is saying we acknowledge that some of the risk is presented, but it doesn't include everything to the level that it needs to be included. Virginia,
Right, but
uh,
I don't know. I agree with all of this, and I understand that this is a very heavy duty safety profile. But seeing that screen on the video where it's integrated into the video, it's not, the white font at the end with the Star Wars scroll, to me is a signal that somebody at the company told them that they have to put some safety in the main portion of the video. It's definitely a miss, and it didn't communicate nearly enough for an HCP to understand the seriousness of the safety profile. But I have to say that they tried. And I think that that's important to remember too. I don't know. There's always a story behind these letters, is my opinion. So, but yeah, let's keep going.
so what's interesting then is, again, continuing on the discussion about the presentation of risk. What we see here again in this next section is they talk about how they acknowledge that some of the risk was presented. And what they're describing here is they say specifically, the important warning and precautions, which include the serious risks, are presented as static on-screen text in small plain font over approximately 5 seconds at the end of the video. Now, this is really interesting because the version of the video that we were able to find online is about 10 minutes, and about 5 minutes is a voiceover reading of the ISI. So if I skip to the section here, about 5 minutes of this video includes the ISI, but this version appears to have been posted prior to December. And in the letter that the agency has issued, they're citing a post December version. So it appears that they are looking at a different version of the video than what we were able to find online. And what I think is important to call out here is that it appears that the ISI is presented in a different format where they've presented it in very small plain font, and they've only shown it on screen for about 5 seconds. And I think that that's one of the major motivating issues in this letter. I think that's one of the reasons why they received the letter, because as we know, the agency has been fairly consistent that the ISI needs to be presented at the end of the video, but it needs to be presented in a way that it can be read at usually a rate of about 300 words per minute. I did note that it was interesting that they're citing that 5 seconds isn't sufficient to present the ISI, but they didn't cite the Breisbart article, which we've been seeing. So if you look at something like, say, the Zeoman letter, where the scroll of the ISI was faster than that 300 words per minute standard that the FDA has been applying, they cited the Breisbart article. So the Breisbart article has been cited in a number of these letters where the agency has said that either the safety information or in some cases the efficacy information isn't presented on screen long enough for viewers to read the text, but they are saying that the text was only shown for 5 seconds. I'm just a little surprised that they didn't support that a violation by citing the Breisbart article. So I just want to call that out.
It's interesting because that was a decision too, right? So we've seen a copy of the video where there was ISI read and took a much longer duration. So I love to speculate, and it just kind of makes me think, did the team decide that it was okay to cut the safety down because it was going to be on the website surrounded by the ISI? Perhaps. We don't know for sure, but that could be a logical thought process. So that's a really good takeaway, I think, for teams to think you can't necessarily rely on the surrounding safety to protect you if it's not part and parcel in the project.
Yeah, moving on, we get to the non-small cell lung cancer video, and here they talk about the voiceover claim. This is getting to the presentation regarding debridement. So in this video, they say that following the photodynamic therapy, debridement may be performed if residual tumor remains. But this is really important because in the warning precautions, the PI, they specifically say that debridement is mandatory. Also, as we saw in the dosage section when we were looking at the label, it says that debridement 2 to 3 days after each light administration is performed, at least in their clinical trials. So in this case, again, we're talking about an HCP directed video. They're saying debridement may be performed, but I think it's really important that HCPs understand that debridement is mandatory. And that's a really critical component to the treatment of the delivery of the treatment for this product. Any thoughts on that, Virginia?
No, I mean, that was kind of horrifying once I read that and understood what it meant and I kind of processed it. This is just so serious and really scary to think about that being a miss if the doctor doesn't understand exactly what needs to happen. So I think it's important that they called that out and thinking about these types of patients and how sick they are. It's really important that they treat them to the best of their ability.
Yeah. And again, as I said earlier, it would be really helpful if they put the section headings back in these letters. The last thing here is this conclusionary paragraph. It's actually just a line. These claims and presentations, the omission and minimization of contraindications and warnings and precautions, the lack of prominent balancing risk information create the misleading impression regarding the safety of Photofrin. This is the summary. This is the takeaway. But again, it lacks fair balance, and that's kind of right here the conclusion of the safety section of the letter. The next section talks about the MOA. So here, what we're getting into are claims and presentations regarding the MOA. And I'm going to play this from the video just so you can see how they did this in the video.
Yeah, do it. This is a good one.
Photodynamic therapy is proven to boost anti-tumor immunity and improves tumor cell immunogenicity, essentially training the body to attack the invading cancer. Excited states of
Okay, so you saw there, they made a claim about the mechanism of action, and specifically they said that photodynamic therapy is proven to boost anti-tumor immunity. And you also saw on screen they showed a reference to a journal article, but the agency took a look at that and they said no. They said that the article doesn't really support that, and they really took exception with that. Now they do acknowledge, and as we saw in the mechanism of action section when we talked about it earlier, they acknowledge that the mechanism of action does say that tumor death occurs and tumor specific immune responses may result. But saying that is proven and making that conclusionary statement is really a line too far for OPDP. And they say here that these conclusionary claims and presentations regarding proven are misleading. Virginia, what do you think about that?
I'm not surprised. I mean, MOA is one of the trickiest things we have to do in promotion. It is what it is, and most of the time it's the exact way it works might not even be known. So, but it's very common in my experience for companies to want to use MOA to differentiate versus other products or to make a direct link to either efficacy or safety, depending on kind of what they need to communicate. And it's just not always there, and it's practically never there. And so it's a challenge, we'll say that. And this is a good example that I'll definitely use in the future for my work to remind manufacturers that, you know, the MOA is the MOA and then the clinical data is the clinical data, and try to keep them separate because they don't always link up like that. This case, they obviously put some time and thought into it. They cited another reference and it still wasn't enough. So I'm not surprised.
Yep. So finally, the letter concludes with calling out the non-small cell lung cancer video. We talked about this earlier in the esophageal cancer video. But again, the voiceover makes the claim that it can destroy cancer cells with a diameter up to 1.2 centimeters. And as we saw earlier, the product is now approved to treat anything above any tumors with a diameter larger than 1 centimeter. But
I
here they
don't
say no ref. Oh, I'm sorry. Again.
I was gonna say, I don't know why. I don't know if I'll ever understand this one. Like, why would they take that risk for 0.2 centimeters? I'm not understanding it at all, knowing they have the contra and they didn't have any reference to support it. So that one's kind of a head scratcher.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Okay.
long letter, 30
Long
minutes.
letter. I think, you know, this was actually kind of in a weird, geeky regulatory way, exciting to see kind of a beefy, meaty letter come out. We've seen some watered down letters. This one felt really thought out, very intentional, and super important. These are really safety issues. These are sick patients. So it's important to really think about that. And, you know, there's some low hanging fruit in here. The safety kind of it seems like low hanging fruit, you know, the safety at the back, but like we talked about before, maybe there was an educated decision to kind of cut that a little bit, truncate it, knowing that it's in the supported environment of a website. But now we hear that loud and clear. That's not going to work. So I think it's a more complicated letter than it looks on its surface. Each time I read it, I see something new. So, and it just came out yesterday. So keep reading it. Jason, you did an awesome job walking us through processing all this information in a short period of time. This is not our product area. So learning about it quickly and understand, appreciating the science and understanding the relevance of this for our community is really cool. So I hope you guys find this. Anything else you want to add? Sorry, Jason.
No, I agree. I think it's a good letter. The only quibbles I have are it would be helpful if FDA posted a video copy just so we don't have to go tracking down videos online. It'd be really helpful to be able to see the video that they looked at. It would be helpful to better understand what they knew about where the video was being posted, so we have an understanding of, was this just on the product website? Did you see it somewhere else, say social media or other platforms? But those are small quibbles. I think overall, as you said, Virginia, it's a well thought out letter. It's nice to see OPDP really putting a lot of analysis into these letters and providing details. So overall, I think it's a good letter.
Yeah, and we can learn from it. So thank you all for listening. If you stuck with us through the whole discussion, good for you. And we try to provide timely information so we can kind of move quickly and share that with you. And I hope you find that useful. If you do, let us know. You can follow us on our YouTube page and Compliance Forward. All the analyses are posted up there. And we'd love to hear from you. So give us a shout out. Thank you so much.